We have been in this series we're calling The One. And we looked at a few passages so far. And by the way, you can find all these messages on our YouTube channel. I encourage you to do that if you didn't catch the first and second installment. We looked at Luke 15, which shows us the heart of Jesus, the friend of sinners, and how the shepherd leaves the 99 and goes after the one who is lost. And then last week we looked at Romans 9. And Romans 9 reminds us of the heart of love that God has, that His people should have for those who are far from Him. And so we're considering, what's it mean to have a heart for the one, to go after the one like Jesus goes after the one? We've been considering what this means by definition. Here's a definition of what we're talking about when we talk about the one. The one is a person that God has uniquely positioned you, me, to reach for Christ. That's the one. And I believe that the one is out there for all of us. There is someone in your life who doesn't know Jesus, who's far from Him. And just like the shepherd who has a heart to go after the one and to get them out of harm's way, just like Paul who expressed a deep passion and a heart for those who are lost, we're called to do the same. And so we're thinking about these things. Today is what we're calling One Commitment Sunday. And you're going to have a unique opportunity here today. I'm going to set you up for this now. At the end of the message, you're going to be invited to come forward as an act of worship and to take a name, bring a name of someone that you're thinking about, someone in your life that you care about, the one, the person you're uniquely positioned to reach. We're going to ask you to bring those names forward and to present them as an offering to God. We're going to envision this platform like it's an altar. You're going to take a pen and you're going to write on the stage. Yes, kids, I said you're going to write on the stage. A little graffiti up here. And we already have a bunch of names written here representing the names of people that we're thinking about, that we would love to see to come to know God. You're going to have an opportunity. Now, when I talk about this, some of you are like, I'm ready right now. I know you are. You've introduced me to some people that you've been praying for. And so you're going to come up and you're going to want to write that name and you're ready to do it today. There are some others who are still praying about, well, who is that person? Who is the one in my life? You have time to pray about that. I know this too. There are others who really haven't really given it much thought. You don't have a name. You don't know who that person is. And maybe you really don't care to participate in this. I pray that you'll change your mind. Because the message that we're going to hear today reminds us of how urgent the calling and the task and the challenge of reaching the one is. It's urgent. We're going to look at Luke chapter 12 today. And Luke 12 is a passage that includes what you might consider to be some hard sayings, some challenging statements made by Jesus. It does. And you know, there's a tendency to think, boy, what do I make of these? Listen, this passage, I want to remind you, depicts not Luke's imagination. It's not like Luke was writing fiction here and he was making up stories. No, the way we understand the scriptures and the gospel is this, that Luke, inspired by God, was giving us, capturing the very words of God, the teachings of Jesus Christ. I mean, think about that. We're going to hear today, read aloud in our language, the words of Jesus. And so, though these are sometimes hard things to understand, and maybe for some of you, you won't like this, I want to remind you of this. Consider that these are the words of God Himself. It's an urgent message. One Commitment Sunday. Let's go to Luke 12 right now. If you have your Bible, I encourage you to open it up. You know, it's often a good thing to write down some notes. You got that Connect card when you came in. There's a place for notes in the back. I would encourage you to write some things, capture some thoughts, not because I'm saying them, but because God will speak to you. So let's go to Luke chapter 12 right now. Let's hear about the urgency of this message. I want you to see two things. We're going to look at two little vignettes that Jesus shares. And here's what I hope you'll see. I hope you'll see the urgency in taking shelter. That's the first part. And then I pray that you will see the urgency in getting right with God. Let's look at the first part, the urgency of taking shelter. Picking up in Luke 12, verse 54. Here we go. He said to the crowd, Jesus said to the crowd, when you see a cloud rising in the west, immediately you say, it's going to rain. And it does. And when the south wind blows, you say, it's going to be hot. And it is. Hypocrites! You know how to interpret the appearance of the earth and the sky. How is it that you don't know how to interpret this present time? You feel a little of the heat of Jesus. This is one of those hard sayings, right? You feel a little bit of that heat. And here's what he's saying. He's saying, hey, you can predict the weather. We happen to have in our church family a man who was a TV meteorologist, Dennis Bowman. Remember Dennis Bowman? Dennis is a part of our church family, and he was one of the big-time meteorologists on TV a few years back. When I was reading this passage, I thought, I got to ask Dennis something about this. So let me read you the text that I sent to Dennis, a little bit of our text exchange here. I said to Dennis, hey, Luke 12, 54 through 56. This surely has to be a meteorologist's favorite passage, doesn't it? Seems logical, right? He said, here's what he said. This is great. He said, how I wish I could guarantee rain every time I saw a cloud in the west. That's a great comeback, isn't it? And then he said this, because, we were texting back and forth about, the fact that what Jesus was saying was not just a cheap illustration, but actually has weight to it. And he said this. He said, it's true that the humidity is higher near the edge of the Mediterranean, where Jesus would have been when he was telling this story. And he said, so storm clouds close by the shore can be a more likely indicator of impending rain. In other words, this stuff isn't made up. Like what Jesus is talking about, this is actual, this is what was happening to people. And they didn't have the benefit of turning on the TV and seeing a meteorologist, but they could read the clouds. They could get a sense of what was happening. They didn't need to turn on the TV. This is still true today. A couple of weeks ago, I was here late on a weeknight. We had a meeting, and as I was leaving, I noticed there were a group of guys who had been here for a Bible study who were in the parking lot hanging out. So I pulled up next to them, rolled to my window, and just chatted with them for a few minutes. And before I pulled away, I said, hey, they say it's going to snow tomorrow. Well, one of the guys is a retired U.S. Postal Service worker, a mailman. And the mailman said to me, he goes, oh, yeah. He goes, I can smell it in the air. The snow's coming. You ever meet someone like that? And he had so much time outdoors, he seemed to know the weather patterns. And he says, I could even smell it. Well, listen, we know. We could smell it in the air. We could feel it in the breeze. We could see it in the clouds. And when we do, what do? We do something about it. You get an umbrella. You take cover. You find safety from the elements. You get ready. They call off school. And here's what Jesus is saying. He's saying, you can do this. You can look into the clouds. You can predict the weather. Yet, you cannot discern what time it is. You don't seem to know what time it is. And the time is critical. He's saying, if you can read the sky and the clouds, well, then you should be able to look at this present age, and you should be able to discern what's happening and know that the timing is very critical. You should be able to recognize that the Messiah, Jesus says that I am with you. I am present. But here's what people were doing. They were ignoring the signs of the times. They had shut their eyes to the conditions. Yeah, they could read the weather, but they were ignoring the signs that were right in front of them about the person of Jesus. They had their eyes shut to Jesus. It's not just these people, though, that we have in mind today. We have ourselves in mind. And I would suggest that we certainly have our own signs of the times, don't we? I mean, on the positive side, if you're thinking about this through the eyes of a Christian, someone who follows Jesus, we know this. Missionary efforts during the past couple hundred years have exploded. I mean, the gospel is getting out to all the world. People all over the world are hearing about Jesus and the gospel. In fact, Christianity is exploding in the East. It's exciting. Church is growing. That's part of the signs of the time. But there's also a lot of things that they're heavier, that feel more like dark, ominous clouds, a little bit like that thunder we hear outside right now. It's a little more like that. I think that's what I heard. There's things like this. There's terrorism. There's bombings. There's sabotage all over the world. Right now there's an increase in interest in the people of Israel. That's something to pay attention to. We've talked about that previously. There's a sense of natural disasters that seem to be happening all the time. Earthquakes, tsunamis, hurricanes, all of it. There's also a sense of moral decay that seems to get worse and worse with each passing year. Crime's on the rise. Our cities in America are just amuck with all sorts of awful things. And then there's just this growing sense of sexual immorality. Things kids are being taught in schools. There's all this. The signs of the times. And though no one knows the hour or the day, we should be paying attention to the clouds that are gathering. What's happening? This is what Jesus is saying to them. This is what he's saying to us. He's saying, hey, this is all moving towards something. There's a storm that's coming. Are you reading the signs? Hey, are you reading the signs in your own life? I did a hospital visit a while back, and I had an unusual experience in the room. It was just me and the patient. We were visiting, and in came the doctor who was caring for the patient. And the doctor came in. We chit-chatted a bit. She introduced herself to me, and I to her. And then she turned from me. She took the patient by the hand. She got about this far from his face. She said his name, and she said, "You're dying." I had never really seen a doctor do this. She said, "You're dying." And when she said that, the room kind of, the air went out of the room. There was an effect. And I know it might sound like, well, that's a terrible bed manner. No, it wasn't a terrible bedside manner. It actually felt very loving. Being in the room, it seemed like a loving thing. She was, in other words, saying, hey, your end is drawing near. What do you got to do? What do you got to make right? Who do you have to tell that you love them? What's the conversation you have to have between you and God? Maybe that's what she was saying. That's what I was thinking. And the same thing is true here in this passage. Hey, we all wake up in the morning, and with every year that passes, you look in the mirror and you realize, I'm getting older. It's happening. You feel it in your bones. You feel it in the sapping of your energy. You even see it in your face. This is the reality of human life. And so you could see the storm clouds gathering in society. You could see the storm clouds gathering across the world. You could see the storm clouds even in your own life. None of us are promised another day, not even one. And here's the message of Jesus. Don't be blind. Don't be deaf. Don't be insensible. Pay attention. Listen. Understand that there's an opportunity right now. Recognize what God is doing in the world. Recognize what God is doing in your life. We were in the Bahamas, my wife and I, a couple of weeks ago. And we were actually doing ministry there, not just on a vacation. And it was a neat experience. The place where we go was hit really hard in 2019 by Hurricane Dorian. When I say hit really hard, they tell us that usually a hurricane moves pretty swiftly. They usually move pretty fast. Well, this one did not. It literally was moving at like 1 mile per hour. And so it essentially hovered over the island of Abaco. And as it hovered there, 200 plus mile per hour winds just battered this island. And they are still today, 5 years later, trying to dig out and rebuild. We met a Bahamian man named Albert. And Albert, we had a good conversation with him. We asked him, hey, were you here when Dorian hit? And he said, I was. And he told us the story. And the story for him was he was at his home. And they, of course, were in a corner somewhere in their house. But then the winds came. and the winds tore the roof off their house. Can you imagine being in that place? The wind tore the roof off the house, and they found themselves trying to find somewhere to be safe. The waters are rising, and the place where they ended up landing was a staircase that was made of concrete. While everything else was blowing away, they got to the top of the stairs, and they stayed there for 3 days. Can you imagine? 3 days. The waters had risen. They're wondering if anyone's ever going to come to them. Finally, someone with heavy equipment came and scooped them off the stoop of that step. And Albert told us, he said, hey, the result of all that is this. My wife said, if there's ever the threat of a hurricane again, even the threat, we're out of here. She said, whether you're coming with me or not, we're out of here. I'm out of here. And you can understand why. She learned a lesson. She learned that, hey, when there's storm clouds coming, I'm not going to ignore those anymore. I'm going to take shelter. I'm going to seek a refuge. So should we. Look with me at Psalm 91. This idea of finding shelter, of taking refuge. Psalm 91 has some beautiful words in it. It's a great psalm to look at different seasons of your life. Here's what Psalm 91 says, just the first 2 verses. He who dwells in the shelter of the Most High will abide in the shadow of the Almighty. I will say to the Lord, my refuge and my fortress, my God, in whom I trust. Do you say that? I mean, can you say, my rock, my fortress, my shelter, Jesus Christ. God, that's who I trust. Do you have that kind of shelter in your life? Here's what this means. This passage means trusting in the love of Jesus. I absolutely can apply it to that. We can do that. Though this is Old Testament scripture, we can absolutely see Jesus in this. Finding the shelter of God is trusting in the person of Jesus, trusting in the power of God to give you everything you need, whether it's in life or death. That's what it looks like to find refuge in the one who is a shelter, to abide in his shadow. Here's the call. When you see the storm clouds coming, don't wait to find shelter. Trust in God's love. Trust in God's power. Trust in his wisdom to protect you from the storm, to protect you from everything that could destroy you. Because the fact is this is the hard saying. The fact is that all of human existence is moving in that direction. You see it in the clouds. So listen, take cover. Take shelter. This is urgent. Jesus says it himself in John 15, chapter 15, I think it's verse 9. Jesus says, abide in my love. That's like saying, hey, take shelter. Stay in my shadow. So take shelter. This is the first lesson. This is the first message of urgency. Jesus is saying, hey, you could see what's happening in the clouds, see it in your own life, see it in society. Know that there's an opportunity to take cover, to take shelter, and that's in me. Listen to what else he says. Let's go to verse 57. Luke 12:57, just a couple more verses here. Jesus says this. He says, why don't you judge for yourselves what's right? As you are going with your adversary to the magistrate, try hard to be reconciled on the way. Or your adversary may drag you off to the judge, and the judge turn you over to the officer, and the officer throw you into prison. I tell you, you will not get out until you have paid the last penny. Whew. Another one of these hard sayings. So listen, this is about getting right with God. And I want to tell you this. This is not Jesus giving some practical legal counsel about avoiding lawsuits. That's not what this is about. No, this is about avoiding eternity in hell. That's what he's talking about. Jesus' words, not mine. And here's how he depicts it. He talks about a man who's on his way to court with his adversary. Well, it's really easy to see this. That's talking about you and I. And as we proceed and progress through life, we're on our way. We're on our way to stand before the judge with a capital J. And just like the man has an adversary as he goes on his way to court, we have an adversary. Our adversary, so to speak, in this case, is the holy law of God. And the holy law of God stands against us because each one of us has broken the commands of God. Each one of us has violated the holy standard of God. And that law demands to be satisfied. And so here's what Jesus is saying. He's saying, hey, before you stand before the judge, settle your case. Settle your case. You don't have to go and be found guilty. There's an opportunity on the way right now as you walk this path to get right with God. So as fate would have it, I had an interesting illustration come about in just the last couple of days. A few months ago, I was driving not far from here, and I ended up getting a traffic violation. I'm not going to get into the details. I wasn't speeding, but I wound up in a place where I shouldn't be. And so, sure enough, one of our finest pulls me over. He says, "What are you doing?" And I said, "I'm so sorry, sir. I'm a pastor of the church right up there." Totally played that card. It didn't work. Didn't work. Gives me a ticket, right? So I thought, I'm fighting this. This is garbage. I should not be getting this ticket. So I get the thing in the mail, and I say, "Yeah, I'm going to court." Well, I failed, evidently, to put the date of court on my calendar, and just yesterday, I got the response in the mail that I'd missed my trial, and therefore I was guilty. My wife says, "This is a terribly expensive sermon illustration." I said, "You're right, it is." And I was so frustrated by this. But listen, you saying I go to church when you stand before the judge, that's not going to cut it. I missed my opportunity to settle. And now I'm going to pay the price. This is the message that Jesus is putting before us right now. He's saying this, don't let your opportunity slip through your fingers. Judgment will go against you. If you go before the judge and you haven't settled before you get there, it'll go against you. And here's what he says. This is one of the hard sayings. He says, you'll be thrown into prison. And make no mistake about it, the prison that Jesus is speaking of here is that of hell. That's hell. And so what's the point? The point is this. Don't wait to come to Jesus. Don't put it off until it's too late. Come to him now. Make peace with God. Let me show you something here, okay? Go to Romans chapter 3 with me, just briefly. Romans 3. I want you to see this, okay? This isn't me reading into the passage. You see this reflected in Scripture. Look at Romans 3, for instance, Romans 3:23. All have sinned and fall short of the glory of God. Everyone's guilty. The adversary, the law, stands against all of us. Or look at Romans 3:10 through 12. There is no one righteous, not even one. There is no one who understands. There is no one who seeks God. All have turned away. They have together become worthless. There's no one who does good, not even one. Listen, we're born in sin. We don't love God. In fact, we often live as enemies of God. This is the sobering truth. This is why you don't want to stand before the judge. There is hope. Look at John 16, verse 33. John 16, verse 33 reads as such. It says this. Sorry, wrong page. 16:33. I've told you these things, Jesus says, so that in me you may have what? Peace. In this world you will have trouble, but take heart, I've overcome the world. Jesus said there's a way to make peace with God. It's through me. You don't have to stand before the judge and try to plead your own case. You'll lose that trial. He says they could be peace with God, and peace of God is the principal thing which the gospel of Jesus Christ offers to your soul. Jesus alone can redeem us from sin. In fact, Jesus became sin himself. And if you will get right with God through Jesus, there's no condemnation for you. There's no guilty verdict for you. But you've got to make it right with Jesus. Listen, you have nothing. I have nothing. We have nothing of value, anything that is worth anything, until we have peace with God. You have nothing unless you have peace with God. And the message that Jesus is underscoring once again for us is that this is an urgent matter. It's urgent for you. It's urgent for me. We're all walking towards a day when our eternal destination will be finalized. It'll be decided. And so listen, you can be found safe in the love of God. The person without Christ, finds the torments and the helplessness of the prison of hell. So here's what I would say. Listen, we can never rest. We can never rest as a church, as individuals, until every person, all, are reconciled to God. This is the urgency of the one that we're talking about. And listen, this is for you yourself. Have you got right with God through Jesus Christ? Have you sought shelter in Him? Hey, it's as simple as saying, God, you're my refuge. You're my shelter. Cover me. There's not a magic formula. It's a position of your heart turning towards Him. Saying, God, I need the shelter because I'm a sinner. I need to make right with you. I need to get right with you because I can't stand before the judge of my own. You yourself, you. But this is also for everyone. It's a message for everyone. Let's do this real quick. I want to go through just 3 very practical application questions that may be helpful to us as we consider this quest, the urgency of this message for the one. Okay, here's the first one. I'm going to go through these quickly. Okay, maybe you can write these down. Who can I pray for regularly that doesn't know Jesus? This is important. This is important. Okay, so if we truly believe in the greatness of the message of the gospel, if we truly believe in damnation, if we truly believe in the joy of eternal life, then the least we could do is to pray for people who don't know Jesus, who are walking towards the judge and haven't got right, haven't made peace. That's the least we could do. And so listen, who can you pray for regularly? Prayer is the first step. To pray for that name, that one who's on your heart. Okay, here's the second thing. Here's a second practical application question. How can I intentionally, underline that, befriend and engage with lost people who don't know Jesus, lost friends and neighbors? How can you do that? I'll give you an example from my life. I do often find myself here, long days, and I love it. I love being at the church. I love being around the people who are part of the church family here. But if I'm careful, I'll find myself not around people who don't know Jesus. And I'm called to that also. And so here's something I do every week. Every week, at least once, I plant myself in a local coffee shop and I work from there. And my purpose is to strike up conversations with people, to build some relationships. I need to be intentional about befriending people who aren't a part of Christ Church of Grove Farm, who aren't the Christian circle. And listen, you need to lean into that too. And you may have to lean in because our tendencies want to lean away from being intentional with people who don't know Jesus, but you got to lean into that. Lean in. Here's the third practical application question. Here it is. And it's this. When can you introduce the good news of Jesus into your conversations? This is important. When can you introduce the good news of Jesus in your conversations? At some point, we have to witness. Witness meaning, I was once lost, but now I'm found. Let me tell you what God's done in my life. And I would say this, as you consider the call to be a witness, listen, be winsome, be loving, be straightforward. There's a delicate balance here. A delicate balance, but there's also an urgent task to share the gospel. Hey, don't be the person who has 10 years of friendship with someone, but no gospel. Don't be that person. Also, don't be the person who just mows people down with Bible verses without actually trying to earn someone's trust first. Right? That's the delicate balance. But at some point, we have to get serious and say, hey, I'm praying for you. Hey, come to church with me. Hey, let me tell you what God's done in my life. We have to get serious about that. So 3 practical application questions. Consider those. Consider the urgency of the gospel. I'll close with this. I was talking to Pastor Mike Arnold this week about this message, and we were thinking about this moment today that we're going to have. And it reminded us of experiences we'd had in school, whether it was in athletics or even on the stage, theater. And the experience is this. I think a lot of you probably remember days like this. I don't know if school is like this today, but it used to be this way. That if you're on a sports team, for instance, that there would often be a cut list, right? A list of people who made the team. Or if you're in theater, there'd be a cast list to be posted somewhere. Remember these moments? And you walk up and you look at that list, and you're either excited to find your name on the list, yeah, or you're disappointed to find your name's on the list. I can remember I played Division III football. And I can remember my freshman year, there were about 85 guys on the team. But when we traveled, there were only about 53 seats on the bus. And so not everyone would go to the away games. I remember going to see, am I on the travel squad? Is my name there? Listen. Is your name on the list? Have you sought shelter in Jesus Christ? Have you got right with God through Jesus and Jesus alone? There's a passage in the book of Revelation at the end of the Bible, and that passage actually points us to a day. This is Revelation 13, where it speaks of the Lamb's book of life. And in the Lamb's book of life are names of all those who have taken shelter in God's love through Jesus. In the Lamb's book of life are the names of all those who have gotten right with God. I'll tell you this, when you go look at that cast list, when you go and look at the teams, the roster, and you look at that, not only do you find your own name, but then what do you do next? You look for your friends' names. Did my buddy make the list? Who else is there? And you're excited again when you see your friend's name on the list, and you might be disappointed when you see that they're not going to be joining you. Don't you desire the people in your life to show up in the Lamb's book of life, their names written in it? This is what the one's all about. And I believe this moment that we're about to have here in this room, this may very well be a precursor to the person that's on your heart finding their name in the Lamb's book of life. Here's why it's a precursor. Because you submit their name to God. You pray for them. And you love them. You serve them. And you invite them. You share with them. That, my friends, could absolutely lead to them knowing Jesus themselves. This is a big moment. It's urgent. And so here's what I call you to today. I call you to bring a name as an act of worship and to place that name at the feet of Jesus on the altar that is this stage. You're going to be coming forward, and as you do, there are pens or markers here. You're going to grab a marker. You can climb these stairs, and there's plenty of room to write the names that you've got on your heart. And as you write those names, make it your commitment to God, a commitment of faith to pray for, to love, to serve, to share, to invite the one who doesn't know Jesus. Listen, don't let the physical part be a hindrance. If you need help up the stairs, someone will help you. If you don't want to get upstairs, come out through that door over there where they're standing, and they'll let you up through there, and there's a way to get up without stairs. But don't hinder. Now is the time to worship. Now's the time to bring the name forward. And as you do, think about this psalm. Come, now is the time to worship. It's not just for you to worship. Now is the time for your one to worship in light of the God who loves us and gave his son Jesus. Would you rise to your feet? We invite you to come and to write a name. The moment is urgent. Let's worship God.